Hi there, my name is Kevin, and this is a tutorial on how to draw a Harpy Eagle using charcoal. If you don't have charcoal, you can just use graphite. There is a full list of everything I used in the description down below. Now I'm just starting out with HB charcoal to sketch the eagle. You just want a starting point for your drawing, nothing too detailed. Clean up your lines with an eraser. Here I'm just using a kneadable eraser. And now I'm using Euroblend charcoal, HB. It's about the equivalent of 2B graphite or 2B charcoal, if you have that. Now I'm just adding slightly more refined features. Still not going into too much detail. Just trying to get a better starting point for the rest of the drawing. Here I'm sketching in some basic feathers. And the rest of the features. I switched back to the HB charcoal here, just sketching the talons and work on the branch that the eagle's perched on. Back to Euroblend for a bit more detail. And there you go. Using an eraser to clean up a bit. Here I'm using vine charcoal to just roughly shade over the whole drawing. Vine charcoal is just very soft charcoal. If you don't have this, you don't have to do this step. You could just roughly shade over with 2B charcoal and then blend over with a paper towel like I did just there. Now I am adding highlights, just basic highlights. Because of the vine charcoal, I can't actually erase all the charcoal off the paper, but you'll see why I need these highlights later. Now I'm using Euroblend again to just add some rough shading to the beak and the eyes. And now I'm going over that shading with regular HB charcoal for more detail. Now you want to go over the shading that you made with the darker pencil, just to make it more detailed and just sharper. And use an eraser to clean up your lines if you need to. I'm shading up the forehead. And moving on to the head feathers. And this video is sped up by 1000%, so it's 10 times faster than how I was actually drawing it. I didn't want to put out a 3-hour long video, so but you can get kind of an idea of how long I spent on each step. Now I'm just working on the neck feathers a bit. And just slowly making my way around the head. And that's about it. Using Vine Charcoal again to work in my background a bit, and using a blending stump to blend in my shading, just to smooth it out. Here I'm using white charcoal to pick up my highlights. And if you don't erase before using white charcoal, you end up with this bluish white that isn't always ideal. So if you want to make your highlights as white as possible, just don't use white charcoal over thick layers of charcoal, or else you get this weird bluish charcoal, white charcoal. Just kind of try to avoid most of the time. And now we can move on to the wing. And I basically wanted to get the outline of the wing done first. And to do that, I had to work on the background. I just used Euroblend to kind of block in the background and shade it in, and use the blending stump to smooth out the shading. And now I'm using an eraser to pick out highlights of the feathers. And I'm working on the outline with an HB pencil. And I decided to work on the outside edges of the wing and work my way inwards. And that's usually a lot easier when you have a large area to cover. Here I'm adding some rough shading and blending it in just to give me a starting point for shading, for more detailed shading. And I didn't draw in every single feather. I just drew in enough feathers to add, a bit more depth to the drawing. So you don't have to draw in every single feather. You just have to draw in enough that it doesn't look too, it's just too basic or too simple. Just draw enough feathers to make it look like a wing, and to make your drawing a bit more pleasing to the eye. And this was pretty tedious. I lost my place a lot from the reference I was using, so it's not perfect. And pick up your highlights a bit with a kneadable eraser here and there. And now I just used a blending stump to kind of smooth out my shading a bit, and use white charcoal to pick up my highlights. Now I'm working on the rest of the wing. Started by using my darker charcoal to add outlines and shadows. And I switched back to HB charcoal to add details. And use the blending stump to smooth over my shading a bit. And I erased a bit of the background and blended over it just to add some depth, just make it more interesting. And now I started moving my way down the bird's chest. Drawing in some of the neck feathers, extending downward. Yeah, I'm working on the other wing. And I'm working on the background a bit here before moving on with the rest of the drawing. And I switched back to white charcoal just to add a bit of highlight to the edges of the bird and to the feathers here and there. I'm shading in the rest of the body and the tail feathers. I moved on to the bird's legs and basically just added in the basic patterns that are on the legs of the bird. Use white charcoal to pick out some highlights before moving on to the other leg. Now I moved down to the talons, just using HB charcoal to add details here. And define the branches as you move along. Use a white charcoal to kind of pick out your highlights a bit. And start working on the other leg, the other foot. and just add some quick highlights. And start adding a bit of rough shading to the tree branch using darker charcoal. For me it was Euroblend charcoal, but use whatever you have. And use white charcoal to add a bit of highlight, and you can tell how much contrast that adds using white charcoal. Kind of start adding finishing touches to your shading. And yeah, and work on your background, add whatever details you want. Alright, here's the finished drawing. And it's not perfect, but it's just one way of drawing this. I'll post a link to the image that I used, that I referenced, in the description down below, so you can try it your own way or try and follow along with how I did it. Either way, I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time.